amid hollow days, permeated by the invisible smell of an unending summer. There's a girl that sees water on land, a girl who feels weird at times, a girl leaking due to a draining dam, a girl at the edge of a drought, a girl using a Joker's mask, a girl burning alive, a girl tainted by her blood red past, a girl who's hollow inside, a girl seeking to die. Welcome to the first part of a full analysis of WataTabe and a deep dive on one of the best written characters ever, in my eyes. Chapter 0 Ante 0.1 A Fractured Girl. A girl who seeks death waits for the sea excels at sharing an overhead view of what the story as a whole is going to be about. A brief poem puts us in perspective on the depression that Hinako is facing. A text from her aunt explains that her family is dead, and soon it'll be their death's anniversary. Then another one coming from her only friend tells her they won't be able to walk to school together. She drops her phone, hugs her legs, and picks at a family picture. I don't want to go. Walking through the beach, we see her contrasting to the rest of reality. People talk, yet she remains quiet. Kids run, yet she moves in slow motion, marking her own tempo. Summer, the unending summer. It awakens pain, it makes her suffer. Sadness surges like bubbles. It's unclear why, it's unclear what happened, but while this morning is bright, she remains somber, as her past's darkness floods with tragedy her mind. After getting to school, this behavior isn't left behind. In fact, it becomes the center of a conversation. Her best friend, Miko, shares her worry for her. She's overall described by her classmates as pacey, distracted, clumsy. She always gets into trouble, she trips over nothing, and the words keep coming. The people keep talking. They mustn't they? Not that she could tell. Her mind gets lost in the deep waters that fill everything, and all she can hear is the muffled sound of unintelligible mutters. Ante 0.2 A Broken Girl. This is what is known as dissociation. It is a defense mechanism used by the brain to protect itself from overwhelming and hurtful information. Think about a time you needed to be left alone with your thoughts and you had the feeling that space warped, trembling eyes, tunnel or blurred vision, losing track of time, moving automatically without your head thinking, or feeling like you pulled the plug that connects your brain to your body. It's a way for the mind to process an influx of emotions and info, though there's far more beneath that simple breakdown of the word. So let's begin by the fact that this term is an umbrella. Overall, this is what it is. This is what it does. But there are 4 types of dissociation, and they work in a spectrum, which indicates the severity and complexity of a dissociative disorder. In order to understand where our protagonist lands, let me go real quick over it. Dissociation usually happens during a traumatic event as a reaction to a trigger that resurfaces trauma. It's usually linked to PTSD, but not necessarily tied to it, and here's where spacing out and daydreaming come in. For a normal person, these are triggered by non-traumatic situations that are emotionally and mentally overwhelming, like an argument, crunch, and high stress. This is natural, it's normal, and about half of people have experienced this non-disordered dissociation. For someone with PTSD and trauma, though, both can still be symptoms. That's why they're considered the lower end of the dissociative spectrum. For example, at the beginning we see Hinako getting lost in thoughts while walking through the beach. But again, it's just the tip of the iceberg. After this, we have the next echelon, DA or dissociative amnesia, followed by PTSD. Complex PTSD has some other symptoms, and after this we enter in DPDR or Depersonalization, Derealization, and finally Dissociative Identity Disorder or DID. The more complex a disorder is, the more shit it carries because it stacks. Someone with DIT has flashbacks, amnesia, derealization, depersonalization, and a fragmentation of their personality all at once. Hinako falls in the TPDR category, which means PTSD, DA, and the formers are represented in some form. DIT will be mostly left out for this video. In this first part, we'll go through these disorders and beyond, exploring other sides of Hinako's depression, trauma, and the devastating consequences it had on her mind. This character is one of the best written I've seen in all media, and you can say the same for the other two and the plot in general. So I hope you like this series, and if you haven't, get feedback for this breakdown from the original anime. Let's begin with the blue, diaphanous. Chapter 1, Hinako, 1.1, Sea of Sorrow. Simply put, derealization is a disconnection from your surroundings. Everyone's experience varies. Some might say that it's like being surrounded by deep mist. Others can explain that it's like everything just ceased existing, while others will feel like they're buried at the bottom of the sea. This analogy is very on point because it helps exemplify a disconnection of all 5 senses. Smell nullified by the lack of air, touch overridden by the waves, an inexistent taste, sight blurred while submerged, and sound absent like in space. As mentioned before, dissociation happens as a response to hurtful and overwhelming information. In this case, the conversation triggers Hinako. Even if superficially it seems like just a chat about her behavior, it actually ties back to her depression and trauma. The way she acts is a result of the current season, one that brings back to her painful memories that make her sad, and as such, she's acting differently, more depressed than she already is. Think of this as a cup. Ours is mostly empty, but hers is already half filled. Now, however, all of these damaging memories are acting as drops, slowly filling it, while she desperately tries to hold back as many of them as she possibly can. And that countering force is dissociation. Her classmates talk about this as if it was nothing, just a character trait, when in reality it runs deeper than that. It's a mechanism born from trauma, but it can get to her if she dissociates, and as such, she'll be safe. All instances of derealization have Hinako experiencing something that is directly related to the traumatic event. The conversation between Miko and her classmates looped her back into that memory. Her current personality is due to the death of her family. It's something that shocked her. I mean, how complicated will it be to understand for a kid's brain that the ones closest to them are dead? How do you explain to a child that they won't see them again, that they're gone forever? And how do you expect them to react to that? It's inconceivable to children in practice, which is why child trauma is so dangerous. The same way their values and personality is going to be based on what they learn from their surroundings the first years of their life, something so dense is going to cause a massive stain to their brain. You didn't spray a tree with venom, you fed the bud with venom, and that damage will be absorbed at its core and captured in its leaves, trunk, roots and branches as it grows. That is if it ever grows. By this point in my old video, I wouldn't be done with dissociation. This section is allegedly missing information I touched upon before. The thing is that, at the time, I judged that Hinako only had derealization, and one of the things I've learned is that a lot of my points actually belong to DP and DA. So, while within the next couple seconds I'd be finished before, now we're barely a third of the way done with dissociation. Hinako, 1.2, Mist of Sorrow. Depersonalization, or DP, is a feeling of disconnection to your own experience. You might feel you become a spectator of your own life, following in third person your own existence, as if you were outside of your own body, as if there was a dissonance with your own thoughts and actions. Besides this, depersonalization experiences can also include weird sensorial detachment or distortion. A common example is feeling your limbs like they're far, far away, or perceive your body distorted. You grow distant from the world instead of the world growing distant from you. Your cells condensate, becoming the fog. Talking about TP and DR individually is really hard and also wrong, because they are two sides of the same coin, hence TPDR. Some might experience more depersonalization, some might experience more derealization, but an episode is on one or the other. It's a combination of both with one that might be more dominant, and for Hinako, that's DR. A detail about the disorder is that an episode can last for minutes, hours, weeks, months, years. Some people live and don't feel on a daily basis, and while I don't want to project since I'm not diagnosed, I have to say that the single fact of researching for this video has been increasingly painful due to the overwhelming amount of similarities I've connected to my own experience of feeling detached from reality and myself on a daily basis. To me, it's like seeing through a tainted glass. Everything is so blurry. I struggle to live in the moment because when time and space bend, it becomes hard to interpret them, almost as if everything was an abstract piece of art. This subsequently affects my memory. I can recall things as facts, I can tell you what I ate yesterday, but if you were to enter my head, it would be an ocean of paint splashed to have emotionless, somewhat resembling recreation of my meal, like a poorly generated AI image. My experience probably started all the way back in the pandemic, and this has been my life ever since. I can't live in the moment, I can't save emotions or sensations, and I've tried a lot of stuff, but everything becomes a blur the instant it becomes the past. The reason why I bring this up is because Hinako experiences something similar through a specific type of shot that is used wisely to convey a sense of disconnection. Nowadays we see animation studios cutting corners wherever they can, and that includes static shots. However, in WataTabe, these signs of a poor system become a visual resource that puts us in Hinako's POV. In these shots, only sound can be heard, while the gears of space stop. In others, movement is captured, but the overhead views and close-ups of Hinako feel very personal. Since episode 1, we are shown both DR and DP through these shots that share the tragedy that is actively living in the consequences of trauma. Normal scenes, eating lunch, studying, walking, it's all day-to-day activities, day-to-day monochrony, a continuous erasure, a leaking of sanity that drips slowly out of your skull like an inverted Chinese water torture on a daily basis. But remember, dissociative disorders are a spectrum that stacks shit the further you're unwillingly willing to go. Hinako 1.3 Dam of Sorrow. Isn't it weird? You're being choked, but the water is shapeless. Your mind was set ablaze, but the fire is opaque. You're drowning while burning alive. The ocean refuses to extinguish the infernal flames, and the flames refuse to light the huddled darkness of the ocean. You know you're being attacked. You know a horror lurks in the shadows, causing all of this hellish torture, but it hides in the cosmic gloom of the sea. You know, you just know, but the water that chokes you is shapeless, and the fire that burns you is opaque. Dissociative amnesia is a failure in the keep process of memory. The way it works is first receiving the information, categorizing it, storing it, to then retrieve it when necessary. Well, memory loss is a malfunction in any of those steps. What differentiates DA from regular amnesia is that the information exists, because the critical steps that fail are categorizing and reaccessing it. It's information that can be found, but not easily. There's more about this dissociation, but it's pretty secondary in her case for now, and most of this doesn't even apply to her. But there's one characteristic of the 8 that is present and we see clearly in episode 1. Hinako is about to exit school, but before she can change her shoes, Miko catches up to her to ask energetically if they can go to some places on the way back home, and contrasting with the silent Hinako we've been seeing, she has a smile and shows happiness and excitement over the plan. However, a classmate appears to tell Miko that some teachers are looking for her, and the plan is postponed until she's done with her academic affairs. After they wave goodbye, her smile and eyebrows drop, her facial muscles give up, and an all too familiar blue taint stains the locker room. Hinako finds herself wandering at the bottom of the ocean while her steps echo across the waters, wondering what she should do while waiting for her friend, when suddenly her lucky perception captures vaguely the presence of Shiori, who catches her attention. The divergence of her body guides her body outside the school, trying to catch up to her, and suddenly the world goes back to the sunset she overshadowed, and instead she's the one who, fading, slides across space. Her deviated attention brings her to the outskirts of the school premises, completely lost in trance to the point where she forgot to change shoes. She forgot what she went out chasing. It isn't until dusk whispers to her the pass of time that she wakes up and re-emerges. This curious dissociative experience is referred to as dissociative fugue, described as coming back to one's senses. The greatest example is travel fugue, which is finding yourself in a new, unknown place without having an idea of how you got there. However, DF doesn't need to be such an extreme case. In fact, what Hinako experiences can also be a dissociative fugue, just finding yourself somewhere familiar without remembering how you got there, which would be a fugue without travel. Most of what I shared with you happens in episode 1. Like I said, it does an amazing job at laying the groundwork from which everything will begin to grow. Hinako's dissociation is showcased in 4 major occasions throughout the episode, each escalating and showing more the pile of shit that DPDR is. The blinding flashbacks making her space out at the beach, the hidden message of the conversation that drags her deep into the ocean, the monotony of daily life tainted by trauma, and finally the drainage that converges everything. This topic is genuinely amazing and well presented, and the quality doesn't go down anytime soon. Hinako 1.4 Flourishing Drought. I want to talk about this topic as a breaker for what's about to come. Depression comes with a lot of symptoms, but I want to particularly focus on a very dangerous consequence of it, which is her diet imbalance. This chapter of the video comes from a very small scene in episode 2 where Shiori mentions that after being asked by Hinako, she didn't bring food to school. Hinako offers her entire bento to her, not half for a specific thing in it. She extends the whole thing to her, after which we're explicitly told she doesn't prepare her food out of her own free will. Hinako lives alone, her aunt travels a lot, which means she's mostly on her own. And during middle school, and possibly prior to it, she bought her lunch at convenience stores, a combination of depression and poor culinary skills. Her friend, Miko, saw this as a problem, so she decided to teach her how to prepare a nutritious, filling and tasty bento for herself. She's also actively monitoring how she eats, which, said by her, is what ties her to this diet. Without Miko, who knows how she'd be eating, if at all. In Hinako's case, her lack of interest in food is born from an imbalance derived from depression. Some people might feel the urge to eat more than usual, because eating is a pleasant activity that makes us happy, and once that moment of happiness is gone, you want to go back to it, so you eat more, and more. A rejection of food, however, happens because depression causes a decrease in the production of hunger hormones, which then leads to a lack of nutrients, which in turn weakens you and your immune system, spiraling down deeper and making it harder to get out of a depressive episode. It should also be noted that anorexia does not apply in this scenario. That condition is usually tied to a fear of food and its consequences, while this depressive eating disorder is the result of a lack of energy and motivation. I personally also had a similar experience, so if you'd excuse me, during the same time frame I talked about earlier, I'd be left alone with online classes all day while my parents went to work. It was a horrible period for me and my mental health, and eventually I would either forget entirely to feed myself or just not feel like it. That's how little depression makes you care for your well-being, and it was much worse when I had to take care of my brother because he would go without eating too. One way to overcome this disorder is by planning meals, which helps you to auto-regulate or bring yourself to eat properly. However, you need one thing: motivation. But as you might have guessed, depression is a bitch, and that's the main thing it strips from you. Which is why living in a household where you aren't the one in charge of the cooking can be beneficial, because the food is being prepared, so it removes that step. But even with the cooking taken care of, you might not feel like eating at all, which is why an invested and caring person like Miko can be so beneficial too. Like I said, without her, who knows how Hinako's nutrition would be, and while from her perspective it can be annoying, it's ultimately for her own good. This is genuinely the only topic that ends in a positive note, so much so that it's only brought up in episode 2. Good on one hand, but bad too, because it means all down from here. Hinako 1.5. The comedy of a tragedy. After seeing these 10 psychological topics, you might already understand how bad Hinako's hurt, which is why it's so weird to see her behave normally in public. She just acts like a normal girl, maybe a little bit distracted and introverted, but she can handle day-to-day conversations without being awkward. The extroverted girl is her bestie, and from an outside perspective, she shows no signs of depression or dissociation. If anything, only Miko realizes it at a very superficial level. Then you begin analyzing more deeply her behavior, and you realize she's actually a master of disguise. What is happening here is masking, repressing one's emotions to appear different than what you actually feel. Masking under Hinako's circumstances started as another response to trauma, though it's more of a preventive measure rather than a defense mechanism in real time like dissociation. You see, following her parents' death, she had to keep moving forward. She had to return to her everyday life and attend school. When she was put back into the world, she found herself trapped in a constant cycle of tragedy and misery, bound to the memory of that traumatic event by the multitude's whispers, who talked behind her back. Of course it'd be painful. Instead of moving forward, she was forced to remember every day those she loved were dead. It's also around this time that we see she begins developing dissociation. It's so sad to see this, but it's understandable that she'd want to not feel sad all the time. But how could she not be sad when everyone else felt pity for her? By not being sad. From a young age, she learned to hide her pain behind a masquerade, fooling everyone with a fake facade. Because any, "Are you okay?" Any, "Is everything fine?" Any, "She's the auto's poor daughter," would resurface that trauma, sinking her deeper into the ocean. Her masking also intertwines with an aspect of dissociative disorders, hypervigilance. It means that your brain is actively on the lookout for danger, always in surveillance mode like an animal trying to avoid predators. The thing is that hypervigilance is excruciatingly tiring, so the brain isn't working at its fullest, and this can cause her to have issues with concentration. It generates a cycle where hypervigilance creates exhaustion. Masking manifests when the risk of danger is real, and that combined burnout is then treated with dissociation. She doesn't even need to have flashbacks or get too overwhelmed because the simple fact of actively scanning for danger is enough to drown her. Masking is mostly portrayed in episode 1, and it's actually the first thing of what we've talked about that is exposed. Right in the introductory scene in her bedroom, she messages her aunt saying, "I'm going to be fine on my own." The text she was responding to was one where her aunt mentions it's their 10th anniversary, and that they'd be proud of her for being in high school, and she does it with a grimace of pain. The season is breaking her, but she doesn't want her aunt to worry, so better keep the mask on and prevent the damage, instead of dealing with potential consequences. Of course, prevention is nice, but it doesn't assure complete immunity. Going back to that conversation and first realization episode, I said the memories of her trauma is what triggers her. But with the added context of not wanting to worry people, it becomes obvious why when Miko asks her if she had any troubles getting to school and she insists, looking very worried for her, her response is, "Miko, I'm really not a child." She breaks, and with her guard down, the conversation about her behavior begins, causing her to dissociate. The biggest example that I love for how easy it is to miss is what leads to the DPDR and DA episode at the lockers. She's at hers, about to change shoes, when Miko calls her while sprinting. Now, imagine someone's approaching you from your right. The normal thing to do would be a quarter turn to the right. Well, instead of that, she turns to the left 270 degrees while masking up. It's a very small detail and it happens really quick. But if there's something you gotta know about this adaptation, is its amazing use of the medium to convey stuff and attention to detail. Hinako 1.6 Burning Waves. Hinako isn't one to talk about her issues. That is very obvious. It almost feels as an unspoken boundary her mask establishes, which is why it hurts when someone like Shiori steps over it. Shiori's task is simple, a trade of sorts. She gets to eat a good meal, and Hinako gets to reunite with her family, straight to the point. But Shiori goes beyond that, and we watch Hinako experimenting flashbacks during lunch, after she's asked about her interest in dying, and when she's told she can die yet, her soul dives into an abyss of despair. Her internal voice begs, and her mind dissociates with intensity. The sight of a flame laying on top of the sea brightens the blood in her hands, while, ironically, dusk settles. The following day it happens again. A nice conversation driven correctly interrupted by a comment that scratches her brain, creating another crack, and the only reaction she can have is to derail it into a bumpy road of excuses and lies to avoid shattering entirely. But the tripping is intensifying. It's getting louder. Trip, trip, trip. To the point where later that day, she can barely keep it together. As kids wearing yukatas and kimonos walk past her and Miko, the world slowly stops making sense. Her brain is trying to process what happens, and her friend's words only dumps more to go over. Today's the summer festival. The movement of the leaves in the trees dissolves into the background sky. The words of the kids echo across her memory as her own and her brother's. Images of a distant past flash in her vision. The drops of her once freezing tea begin sliding through the bottle, and they drip, drip, drip. Her gaze is lost in her inside. Hinako. Her head clinging as tight to sanity as it can. If you're in the mood. And then, wanna go together to the summer festival this year? Miko, I'm sorry. She apologizes to her friend in her head, while she's still by her side trying to make up for accidentally helping cause what is about to happen. She never dissociates entirely. She's actively receiving information. She's given no break to stop and process everything. But when she's alone, she herself is dropped into her glass of water, filled past its limit but kept from overflowing gracefully by mere surface tension. It's her mind's last-ditch effort. For the first time, she submerges in her Derealization. For the first time, she's seriously drowning in her own sorrow. And when she's able to finally catch a break, a hand extends to rescue her. A hand resurfaces her. Again. Shiori's hand breaks the tension. She invites her to the festival, but she knows she shouldn't go. She knows she's at her limit. She knows it'll end badly. She knows the past 2 days have been building up momentum to break her into a million pieces. She tries. She really does. Her trembling resilience pulls her disguise up to no avail. She can't do this anymore. She quietly begs Shiori to leave her alone because she knows the outcome. She has lived it. But the strength left in her is only enough for her twitching hand to grasp onto the only remnants of her trauma that physically tie her down. She has no escape. She's mentally tied too, so she goes. During this whole section, she's nervous, she's vigilant, trying to comprehend the situation, trying to comprehend Shiori, but finding herself at the deep huddled trenches of her dissociation before she can answer anything. Her face is lit with joy and excitement, while her face is dimmed with ire and melancholy. Feelings she uses to physically tell Shiori that she knew this would happen, that she didn't listen. At this point, everything converges. Her dissociation is trying, but it's futile at this point. Her mask is shattering like the caramel apple she dropped while escaping the judging multitude. She's overloaded, on the verge of a panic attack as drops break free from the top of the glass and through the cracks. And as the play reaches its climax and tears form in her eyes, the final actor breaks the build-up and joins the play for the grand finale. And she collapses. She finally collapses. When you think of trauma, you might think we're referring to an incident, abuse, accident, or disaster. However, trauma is actually the response to an event, both emotional and physical. Hinako, or anyone for that matter, naturally avoiding remembrance aren't avoiding the traumatic event, but the feelings of the reaction to it. That's what leaves scars in a traumatized person. The trauma response of two different people to the same situation varies, which means their trauma isn't the same as you may assume, because we aren't referring to the what, but rather the how one reacted. Next, I need you to understand the concept of the action systems. These are split into two categories, apparently normal part, ANP, and the emotional part, EP. The ANP controls everything we need to get through our normal lives. Things like social interactions, playing, exploring, etc. The emotional part is the one in charge of all defense systems like the fight or flight, freezing, hypervigilance, and many more, including all the heavy emotions associated with a traumatic event. ANP tries as hard as it can to avoid interacting with EP, and here's where dissociation comes in as a mechanism for it to steer away from it. Of course, masking is also relevant in this conversation, but here I need to make a small parenthesis. Masking and this separation attempt are different, and while they can overlap, they shouldn't be mistaken. Masking is more of a social phenomenon to fit in or to meet expectations, and what Hinako is experiencing is an avoidance to keep her NAP and EP separated. In simple terms, the apparently normal part lives in the present and is in charge of the daily routine and activities, constantly trying to avoid the emotional part that lives anchored to the past. When Hinako developed masking, it was as a method to prevent these two parts from meeting each other, as people's pity also anchored her to the past. Finally, PTSD. It exists in a scale alongside CPTSD and TID, and the key difference between them is that in PTSD you only have one apparently normal part and one emotional part, while in CPTSD you have one and many, and in DID you have many of each. When everything fails and both parts meet, you experience flashbacks. You live the past in the present. You feel like you're still in danger, and so the trauma triggers. Hinako's trigger was the sense of hopelessness and despair she experienced in that fateful moment, not the accident in itself. Again, trauma is the response, which led to her collapsing and having that PTSD attack. Heavy breathing, panicking. It breaks my heart to imagine someone almost my age going through this. The build-up we mostly saw in episode 2 accumulated like gunpowder. The fireworks were only the spark, the vision of that shrieking fire floating in water. I think it's long overdue to talk about what happened in that fateful summer. Hinako 1.7 Suffocating Flames. 9 years ago, the Yautoses had a family trip to the beach, their first time out together as a united family. It was a fun time, and now they were back on the road home in the darkness of the night. The father was at the steering wheel, carefully driving with a focused mind. The ingredients for a cocktail of peace for him, his wife, and some rest for the kids. However, the headlights in front would cruelly remind them that it takes two for a tragedy to happen. Quicker than he could react, a truck appeared in their line, leaving no time for a proper reaction. The father steered out of its way in shock, prompting the car to drift out of control, flinging the vehicle off the road. They dropped dozens of meters off the cliff straight into the grasp of the ocean, and upon impact the vehicle bursted into flames, consuming everything and everyone inside, little by little. The only survivor was Hinako, who was launched out of the car as it fell, crashing into a high-ground grass, minimizing the impact, but still tainting the scene with splashes of blood across the environment and her clothes, helplessly witnessing with tears flooding her eyes how the flames left nothing of her loved ones behind. What happened after is a blur. It was a miracle that she even survived due to the severity of her injuries. She was able to recover in the hospital and her aunt took custody of her, going back to her hometown to continue living, or at least to attempt doing so. The bright world and her own radiating faded away. She was still trying to comprehend what had happened, adjusting the universe's reality to her own, and while doing so the quiet voices got louder. They burned, they choked her, anchored her to a past she didn't fully comprehend became the past. It isn't only the trauma inflicted by seeing with her eyes how they died incinerated, to then being swallowed into the hollow depths of the ocean. Instead, it was a 180 degrees turn to her whole reality, and everything she could do was learning how to cope. A 6-year-old girl! Hinako doesn't have a safe place to be at peace, because the before, the after, the present and the future, they're all stained with the blood of her loved ones and a burning memory suffocating her mind. Everything reminds her of her family. Everything reminds her of the flames that cremated her love and innocence. Everything drowns her soul deeper into despair. A single spark is enough to relieve in her flesh and bones that experience, cementing that layer of ice above the water's surface that won't let her escape, even if they're only the breeze of a gone past. Hinako 1.8 Cold ashes, calm waters. PTSD isn't the end, and we're still yet to talk about the aftermath. After Hinako collapses in the ground, hyperventilating and re-experiencing, we find her, no tears on her eyes, no muscle contractions in her face. She's nothing more than an emotionally trained husk at this point. This lack of reaction is called emotional numbness, and personally, I think it's the most disturbing thing we've seen so far. Emotional numbness happens when the brain senses we're under an overwhelming amount of stimuli, like stress, burnout, crunch, and so it decides to shut down our emotions to keep us safe from danger. This is yet another defense mechanism attributed to the freeze response, and while it seeks to minimize the impact of negative feelings by adding friction with a layer of emptiness, it also decreases the response to positive feelings. Emotional numbness comes in many intensities, ranging from you might feel slightly detached from your emotions, to you live in autopilot, to your brain will shut down entirely, making it impossible for you to feel anything whatsoever. You might have connected some dots, but no, emotional numbness and dissociation are unrelated. When it comes to PTSD, emotional numbness doesn't act in a way that helps you process feelings, because your brain's priority is to survive, and stopping to think isn't a survival tool. One would expect that after the danger goes by, your brain slowly opens the valve to let emotions flow normally. But in people with PTSD, this process is a mess, and leaves them in a chronic state of alert, perpetuating the numbness in a way that isn't healthy. You need happiness, you need warmth, you need tranquility to help process and overcome trauma. But numbness doesn't allow you to feel them. It holds you watching from afar everything happen, and you know how you should react. You know what emotions goes in these empty sockets, but you can't feel it. The deeper numbness tracks you into its cycle, the more darkness consumes you and the less you're able to express emotion until you reach the bottom and you become hollow. Hinako has been feeling numb ever since she woke up in the hospital. Her gaze tells everything because her mouth can't. And something brilliant about the representation of this is that it's mirrored in her design. Her eyes are always wide open and they never move. Her mask is more of a balaclava because her lack of emotion is always seeping through her empty look. And since the beginning, this was mesmerizing and disturbing to me. After her emotions overflow and her brain enters lockdown, her pupils aim to nothing, and it becomes clear that her eyes were never wrong. It was the rest of her face what moved asynchronically, and for the first time, it all comes together to a coherent play that feels natural. Numbness was always natural. While she tells Shiori her past, she doesn't show any emotion. She's devoid but stares back at nothing. It stares inward to its own black abyss. Her voice is mostly monotonous as she remembers the tragedy that bleached her world. She doesn't feel anything because she has already felt everything and her mind is tired. She's exhausted. She can't fall deeper, or at least her numbness won't allow her to. It's uncanny. It doesn't feel right, but it's real and people go through this. It only makes sense that her system would be overloaded with emotion, but instead they get drained, turning a fire-red catastrophe extinguished and bleak. The way emotional numbness takes away from you is horrible, and the thought of someone in the real world living in a continuous shutdown is nothing but torture disguised as anesthesia. It genuinely sinks my heart. Hinako 1.9 A Shattered Girl. Thus far, we've tackled a lot of topics, many compressed in one chapter because you can only count to 9 decimals before you change unit. That's how complex Hinako's character is. And also, this is 90% information showcased in the first 3 episodes. I was not kidding with the title of this video. However, there's one thing we're yet to talk about, the most superficial thing and what went through our heads the first time we got into the anime: depression. Even though you might think that depression is just feeling sad, it's actually the conglomeration of 9 possible symptoms, and for a person to be formally diagnosed with depression, they need to have 5 of them on a mostly constant basis. Now, do I think that if you're feeling terrible and call that depression, you are wrong and should stop crying? No. I don't want anyone's experience to feel minimized by this. It's merely for analysis purposes of a fictional character. Quick second disclaimer, depending on the source, the symptoms may vary, but these are the most common and agreed upon. Number 1. Depressed mood. This is the foundation, the feelings of sadness, hopelessness, or emptiness. It's clear that Hinako experiences these. She's in constant sorrow, even if she puts on a facade to disguise it. Because the simple act of needing to stray away from a dissociative identity that houses a trauma inherently hints at a constant, lurking emotion that brings sadness. She's numb, she's empty, she can't feel happiness on her own. We can only see her suffer in silence when her only friend isn't around to brighten her world. Remember that scene that combined DPDR, DA, and masking? It all started because she was left alone. She was looking forward to hanging out with Miko, but the moment she was gone, Hinako got stranded in the sea again. Number 2. Loss of interest. Also known as anhedonia, we can't really tell if this is a symptom she has or not. She enjoys being distracted while hanging out, but outside of that we don't really know what she even likes, what her hobbies are. It can be that at this point her anhedonia already took over her happiness, and that can be the cause why she can't be left alone. The reason why Miko apologizes so badly for not walking to school with her. Any activity on her own feels pointless. For example, she got a rush of dopamine with the first decent bento she cooked, but she doesn't enjoy cooking. In fact, she finds it a nuisance. Might be, might not be. There isn't explicit proof to say she has anhedonia, but through careful analysis, we can kinda say she does. 3. Weight rapid that changes. Yes, it got its own chapter. 4. Sleep disturbances. For this, I'd say the proof to say she suffers from insomnia or hypersomnia are basically non-existent. No baggy eyes, no sleepiness, no trouble waking up, no trouble waking down. At least when it comes to sleep, she seems to manage a good routine and function normally. Psychomotor agitation or retardation. Remember how in the very first chapter I talked about her movements being very slow? This is retardation. There are very few examples like that sequence, because in the festival, for example, everyone is a static PNG, but when you compare her to Miko and her energetic behavior, or Shiori and her slow but elegant movement, Hinako's feels unnatural, shy, which also translates to her speech. It's something noticeable from the get-go, but due to the passiveness of the adaptation, it's hard to share more proof. 6. Fatigue. As in feeling low in energy and finding tasks difficult to perform? Not really. The closest thing is her recklessness when it comes to cooking, but just like with sleep, she functions fine, really. 7. Poor concentration. If she shows symptoms like this, like her classmate says she does, it's probably dissociation. However, just like masking an NAPEP, or dissociation and emotional numbness, this kind of stuff can overlap. We don't get to see normal instances of a lack of focus, poor memory, or difficulties with decision making, but it sounds like a symptom she has, or may have. And from this point onwards, we need to slow down a bit. Let's go back to the beginning. Being suicidal is one of the 9 symptoms. This is probably the most noticeable and explicit one, as well as the most straightforward to understand. Hinako is constantly insinuating she wishes to die. For example, when the Izon in episode 1 attacks her, she doesn't fight, she doesn't run, she accepts it. And later when Shiori saves her and tells her she's going to eat her, she doesn't react. She doesn't bleed, she accepts it. The only reason why she allows Shiori to get close to her is because she promised to eat her, and when she adds extra steps to that simple task, she isn't pleased, dissociating and begging to the wind for someone, anyone, anything to kill her. However, not once is suicide brought up explicitly. In fact, whenever Shiori asks her why she wishes to die, Hinako recoils and makes up excuses, fabricating tangents and straight-up lies. Her behavior surrounding this topic raises a lot of questions, like why doesn't she commit suicide instead of waiting for someone else to kill her, even when that wait is clearly affecting her mental health? Maybe she's brave enough to do the act? It'd be reasonable, honestly, but the reason is actually more complex than that, and fortunately, episode 3 gave us the answer. During the accident, seeing her life sink into oblivion, a thought crossed her mind, an intrusive one, and so she began crawling to the edge of the cliff. Being full of life seconds ago, she was now trying to terminate the remnants alongside those she loved, but she heard their voice, and it was enough to stop her on her tracks. Hinako, you must survive. This is something that has been bothering her for a while, because her family probably wouldn't be able to form a coherent sentence inside that kiln, and even if they could, their voice would be overshadowed by the roaring fire, and even if it wasn't, she was too far away to be able to hear them properly. Maybe survival instincts? An irrational last-ditch effort to keep her alive? A trick, a hallucination with the ones who could convince her to keep going? She doesn't know. The only thing that's clear is that it was real. The only thing she knows is that she has to follow their will. In the moment, it was a dim beam of light, hope and motivation, but with the years it mutated into an irrational ideal. She's trying. She's been trying for 9 years, but it's clear that such a request with such a fragile foundation isn't going to be enough to keep her both happy and alive. And no desire can alter that. No reason can fight that. No wisdom can change that. No emotion can remediate that, because there is none. She wants to die, but they won't let her. That is what she thinks, for a moment, seconds before her PTSD attack, to then retract due to a crushing sense of remorse. Symptom number 9, worthlessness or excessive guilt. Hinako says this herself. Even if I'm sad enough to want to die, I can't possibly admit to it. I have to live on for my family. There's a clear conflict going on in her head, and she feels incredibly bad about it, to the point of repressing her own feelings in respect of whom she lost. However, her guilt doesn't only come from being unable to fulfill her wish. When telling Shiori how her family died while she survived, she says something very interesting. I couldn't do anything to stop it. I don't interpret this as I couldn't do anything to save them or stop them from dying, but rather I couldn't do anything to save myself. Her biggest regret is not making it into the sea, and it was all because of that voice who's asking her to leave, even if she suffers, and she suffers. So she blames herself for not ending everything right then and there. It's a cycle of self-hatred where, no matter what, she's the villain of her own tragedy. Desire is fed through many other situations with guilt. Even though she didn't want to go to the festival, she's sympathetic of Shiori's effort, so before diluting into the crowd, she apologizes to her for being unstable. In this conversation post-attack, she fears not being able to reap and so she can eat her, and it feels like she's putting the fault on her, increasing the weight on her shoulders. And remember when she was asked by Miko to go together to the festival? Even though she's at fault for nothing, even though she's in chronic pain, even though she's the one hurt, she's the one who apologizes, because she hates being like this. She hates the thought of being a burden to others. She hates thinking how this fucking part of herself she hates is affecting others. That accident rewired her attitude, but at her core, her personality is still the same kind girl she once was. But it's impossible for her to return back to that era, which is why that voice request is irrationally stupid. It's so simple, right? Ask her to act like she didn't become traumatized. Ask her to ignore her suicide attempt and repress that wish. It's ridiculous. How can she live when she hates her own existence? Every atom of her begs for mercy, the only clemency that she can fathom. Death in the present is an alternative to the consequences of not committing suicide back then. But even though she's waiting for the fatal kiss of death, she can't open her arms wide to call her attention. She's died, left to rot in the dark, but kept alive to suffer by the crumbs of a shapeless oath. Unless something as unexpected as that truck got in her path, unless something as volatile as the waves assaulted her, unless something as spontaneous as sparks ignited her, unless something she couldn't predict, unless something she couldn't control, unless someone like Shiori swallowed her whole. Ok, creo que alguna de esas ha de haber salido bien. Y pues conformidad, si no. Oh, no tengo que grabar el outro ahora. Wow! I'm recording this right now inside of my brother's closet, because my closet is full of shit and I can't stand inside of it. there's so much echo in my room, in like my entire house. So I need to be inside, like in a place where sound can bounce around. It's 12 a.m. It's so late. I should be asleep, but I wanted to record this. I was just recording the last few lines I needed. Particularly those in which I like quote the characters. You know, I voiced Miko, I voiced Hinako for the video. God, this video took like a month to write and record and edit. Of course the quality isn't like what you would expect, but that's part of the point because I spent 3 weeks writing the script. It was 14 pages long to give a good narration, good content, you know, that's what matters here. So I made this animated background, a few, like 2 months ago. So really the only animated thing is like the my character, you know what I mean? Yeah, yes, you know what I mean. Why am I even arguing with who am I arguing with? I'm going insane! Stop! I'm currently preparing a show, and WataTabe is a huge inspiration for it, and the characters, you know, dissociation and all of that. I love these topics. In part, I see myself reflected a lot. I am not diagnosed, so I don't know if I should be saying this, but you know. And yeah, next video is going to have 2 chapters instead of just 1. You know, Hinako's character is very complex, but next we have Shiori and Miko, which I'm just going to merge into a single video. For storytelling reasons, I still want to touch on Shiori's character before really diving into it like in full depth, you know? So it's just going to be Shiori's chapter, kind of superficial, and then Miko's character, and the focus is mostly going to be on Miko, which I really like. I really like Miko, and I think Shiori should definitely kill herself. Last time I made this, like someone I met someone on Twitter, and they told me, you know what, your analysis on Shiori's character is wrong. And I was like, what do you mean? And then they explained it, and I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense, you're right. So you know, I'm going to consider their recommendations and their comments for the future, but in case they're listening, you know them well who you are. And in case you're listening, I am going to keep, I know, okay, I know. I'm really happy with how this video turned out in the end. Like the music and all of that, I just really like. Last time I selected the music as I was cutting the audio, but this time I picked the music after writing the script. So when I narrated, I kind of had the vibes of the music, and I tried to pick more variety of well, last time it was far more chapters, so I needed more tracks, but it was mostly pressure, which fuck. Anyways, I really hope you guys liked the video. I really hope you like the format too. Good podcast. I make podcast. Yeah, I make podcast. You know, I just really like to write, and I want to do voice acting, so you know, this type of narration thing is also good for me. I want to practice my voice because I think my voice fucking sucks. It's still not a passable female voice, or just something fell. Okay, I'm gone. Bye. Goodbye. I hope you enjoyed. Bye.